George Jeffreys is a character from my novel Play with Knives. He's the first-person narrator in my novel Play with Knives, in which he's a probation officer who has a relationship in various ways with the central character, who's a young girl called Clare who murdered her siblings when she was very young, when she was 9, which is why as a probation officer they get to know each other. Clare, I've always written about and been interested in the problem of evil, and Clare to me is a central figure in investigating the problem of evil. For that reason, she is actually, she's a fully dimensional human being. She's aware of what she's done. She's not happy about it, but she's got to cope with it. And she's got to somehow get on with the fact. And in fact, she loved her siblings whom she murdered. So again, she's got a very peculiar situation where she's actually in grief all her life for the people she's murdered, also complete and utter guilt. She basically finds Jeffreys attractive because he doesn't forgive her. He copes with the fact that she's guilty. He doesn't regard her as in any way as not being guilty, and which makes it easier for her because the concept of forgiveness is completely foreign to her and she couldn't cope with it. So that's basically Jeffreys' attraction for her, which is why he's called Jeffreys, because George Jeffreys, of course, was the hanging judge in the Monmouth Assizes, and in my novel he's actually descended from the hanging judge in the Monmouth Assizes. So he's an unforgiving character in some ways, but so they have a relationship where, basically a truth-telling relationship where neither of them forgives each other, and both of them are pretty hard judges on each other and therefore pretty necessary to each other as they go on. Now, Jeffreys, when he gets into my poetry, Jeffreys changes from first person to third person, and he's no longer a probation officer, but he's still involved in the law, and that he's a human rights observer for an organisation somewhat like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or something like that, which gives him an opportunity to travel around and do various things, and gives me an opportunity to write about various situations which I put him in as an observer. Clare crops up in many of these poems, and in the one we're about to read after this, Clare in Paris, is actually about Clare rather than about George. But this is to give a flavour of what George does in these poems. He wakes up in Kabul. So George Jeffreys 1, George Jeffreys woke up in Kabul. George Jeffreys woke up in Kabul. George Bush Jr. was on the TV, obsessed as usual with Baghdad. George Jeffreys hummed an old border ballad which haunted him often now. What's that hurples at my side, the foe that you must fight, my lord, that rides as fast as I might ride, the shadow of your might, my lord. Was George Bush Jr. mad? A plausible US spokesman for one of those countless right-wing think tanks argued on the BBC that W only pretended to be mad, like Nixon, to intimidate his foes. But Nixon thought Jeffreys was mad, surely. Is that the price, perhaps, for pretending too long? Certainly, on the TV now, W had the quality of an animal pretending. As you can see, animals pretend when maintaining uneasy pack position. And he had an animal's absence of self-parody. One lack which Jeffreys, who had seen Ronald Reagan, thought Reagan had not. As with Alzheimer's itself, there was some self-parody in Reagan. None in Nixon, none in either Bush. George Jeffreys looked out at a paved Alhambra of pain, at the lattice dust of Kabul, which looked back and pretended to be sane. Okay, so that's George. And this is Clare in Paris. Clare has actually found herself again being involved in various ways with the law as herself, maybe less of an observer, maybe more of an advocate. She seems to get a little bit more involved in these things than George does. Although George gets pretty involved at one point because he saves the life of George Bush Jr., much to Clare's chagrin. So, he was choking on another pretzel, and George sort of almost inadvertently did the Heimlich, which is okay. Clare in Paris. Clare Collins woke up in the Paris Hilton. Paris Hilton was on the TV. Fox News, having disastered on Iraq, retrained its sights on Paris Hilton more in its scope. But its obscene joy at her suffering, her crying for her mother, filled Clare with horror. The hotel was as smooth, clean and confident with light as Paris herself once. The city itself, however, seemed to Clare the world's most terrible. She had thought at first it would be like a metaphor for herself, who had killed her younger siblings as a child, in what she was forced to acknowledge had been a type of revolution. The catacombs of skeletons, now tourist attractions, might be like the way the haunted have to treat their lives and deaths as overcrowded commodities. Poor Paris, the woman in prison, reminded Clare of grief. At an early age, Clare had been warned by George Jeffreys that any emotion she showed about her crimes, especially remorse, would seem obscene. So she just shrugged her soul back into the normal, felt the usual things about most things with some relief. And one of the more normal things she always felt was grief. Paris, the city, was grief, so grey and sparkling in its rigid over-focus. Grief had made Clare careless with her life, if still organising others with that other, big sisterly carefulness in grief. It seemed as if her dead flocked beneath her wings, upholding her in danger, and she never cared at all if they should let her fall, to be with them again. But now she left the Hilton and found the right address, where suddenly was fire, real fire, not metaphor danced up, about the old hotel become a refuge for women and their children from abuse. Clare was here because the human rights unit she represented had followed up that amnesty report condemning maltreatment of women in France. Perhaps some angry husband had heard that she was visiting. A crowd below watched and videoed, but no one appeared on the landing above. Was the woman in 32 trapped alive waiting? Whole as usual, only in a crisis, Clare climbed the fire escape. No one seemed to see her. I have been a ghost since I was 9, she thought in terror. Jeffreys in her head accused her of melodrama. The metal was hot, but the flames were uneven, sometimes mountainous, then skirting back wider like a pack of wolves. Clare knew to focus on the horizon if one were scared of heights. The Eiffel Tower obsessed the horizon. The window to 42 was open. Inside, a woman was tied to a couch and a baby shrieked. Clare crept in and untied the lady's washing line from her arms. The lady quietly rubbed the blood back as Clare led her out onto the fire escape, holding the baby, which breathed now quickly like a kitten. The crowd at the bottom of the stairs for some reason assumed the women lived together. The lady, who looked like Paris Hilton, fair, fragile, calm and childlike in inviting conversation, said, "I'm Sophie," politely. Clare asked, "Do you want to tell the police?" was relieved when Sophie said, "You bet," in careful English. The walls of flame were rushing at the roof now. One heard their howl and then the sirens. Clare swayed giddily, and in her head Jeffreys said by now she should be used to conflict. "Get back," she smiled, "old superego, you." With Sophie and the baby walking back in the Paris of Sarkozy, this Bastille Day when he had just refused to grant the traditional amnesty in prisons, Clare said, "The only really beautiful parts of Paris are the new concrete suburbs. They remind me of Mount Druitt, small trees in grouted tubs and that same eerie green tinge light has on long concrete malls." She texted Jeffreys, "Darling, as you know, quite practically one can't save anyone at all if one is saving one's own soul." George Jeffreys 7. George Jeffreys woke up in New Orleans. There's some good stuff in that. From an interesting subject point of view, there's voodoo and New Orleans floods and Robert Johnson and all sorts of things, so we do that. George Jeffreys woke up in New Orleans. George Bush Jr. was on the TV, obsessed as usual with Baghdad. The TV should not have been working, thought Jeffreys, as the street below flashed with power lines in water. Hiss. He looked at black water already blacker with blood, shit and all the opals of oil. The TV changed to a group of women wailing in funereal harmony. "Kiss me, mother, kiss your darling, lay my head upon your breast. I am weary, let me rest." George Jeffreys was weary, and so anyway had been New Orleans. Weary. He was searching for Clare, his not-quite girlfriend, who herself sought some victim or other in a local prison. George had driven in on the highway next to the Mississippi, where the levees were okay. The storm had started, was now keening like a train around the building. Another keening noise outside the window George saw was a thin black man clinging upright to a lamppost. At first he had looked as if testing how long he could stand in a storm, but now, thought George, the guy could not let go for fear of flying debris power lines. George felt that Bourbon Street was probably undamaged and a bar seemed more attractive than this, so he left the room and the TV, ploughed over to the lamppost, helped the man that much further down the road. In a brothel's bar full of candelabras, George and the black man drank Southern Comfort. On the wall was a photo of Robert Johnson, the guitarist-singer who was sometimes not mentioned around here, being said to have traded his soul to the master of the Crossroads. Jeffrey's impressions of voodoo had usually been benign, however, involving much dancing, trancing, and a gorgeous goddess Azili clad in blue. For such a weary town, this was not a tied religion. A TV in the corner blurted on the same group of women singing, "I am standing by the river, angels wait to take me home." In the 6th hour of the storm, George left the Southern Comfort with his friend, forced open the door, and walked back towards the night flood, easily, for the wind walked for him. Soon a broken angel in stone floated past, and too distant a tiny nightdress or a child. Waiting weariness will lead always, he thought, to violence. As a child, Clare had killed her younger siblings, for no reason, for some reason that seemed to have significance tonight. The water was black salt. Azili was a seawater spirit from ancient Dahomey. He focused on her and not the crossroads, the sighing black street, but suddenly there was Clare, liquid with rain, in a blue dress, like Azili with trance eyes, walking. Jeffries touched her with both hands and the electricity numbed him to his spine. She held a white purring kitten she had somehow pulled from some electric wires, and George soon guessed she had spoken with the master of the Crossroads, of whom he no longer felt afraid. She said, "If you want to meet him, you should probably do it now before the flood." "The flood?" asked George, puzzling biblically, but she added dryly, "Just the levees. When the waters stabilise tomorrow, it means that this whole city will have become part of Lake Pontchartrain." So Jeffries followed her back down through deeper water to a place near the Garden District. They could hear the Mississippi singing like a choir. The master of the Crossroads leaned back smoking a roll your own, his face, thought George, that of that photo in the bar of Robert Johnson, looking slim and black and much too young in a hat. Clare whispered, "He's obsessed with George Bush Jr. I told him you'd met Bush, didn't mention that you probably saved his life." The last fact still clearly made her bitter. George didn't fancy a dark night analysing Bush, but the master drowned his cigarette under his neat shoe in floodwater with an odd pink smell of jasmine and said, "I will tell you about the buses, Mr. Jeffries. Do you understand about the buses?" George said yes, but the master continued, "The buses don't come, but to Bush the buses exist and are moving people out in an orderly fashion. To him they're as real as his chain of command." Iraq, he thought, was to prove him his chain of command. "I know how this man thinks, Mr. Jeffries. He experiences nothing but an ideal or the chaos of the real. He can't combine the two into a bus that transports people." George nodded. "That, I find, is the problem of evil." The master held another cigarette from somewhere, offered it to Clare, who declined it with her lovely, polite blue eyes. He said, "And you don't smoke either, do you, Mr. Jeffries?" "Sorry, I can't offer you any wine, and my bourbon is in storage for some time." "So your impression of the president is much the same as mine?" Clare's expression dared George to relent a second time, but he said, "He doesn't have to face a new election." Then the master said, "There are more than 2 elections," with a tone of sentimental satisfaction, and was gone. As they walked up, Clare said, "You know, I was quite nervous to go there after everything I've done." For some reason, George kept expecting the cat to become a baby, but it sat as still as a statue in her arms. At the moment, what I've got in the new book is a sequence of poems about a very close relationship between Eleanor Roosevelt and Hillary Clinton. Their relationship progresses. Hillary actually has said that she talks to Eleanor Roosevelt when she's stressed. I'm saying Roosevelt, not Roosevelt, because I think double O is oo. I thought partly one could have that relationship from Hillary's point of view, but I thought it'd be also interesting to have it from Eleanor's. Because obviously Eleanor also talks to Hillary when she's stressed. So, and they develop a very close relationship, which is detailed in several poems in the book. And it actually goes on until Hillary is Secretary of State. So, which means I've got the trifecta on Secretary of State poems at this point. Which actually obviously wasn't intentional because the poems were written before then. I actually thought she'd end up in the Supreme Court and not at that point and on Secretary of State. But when she does, Eleanor can cope with it and advises her to take it, which is what she did. Well, according to the poems, because in the poems Hillary's full of self-doubt and Eleanor reassures her. Unless Hillary does something Eleanor really doesn't like. They're somewhat at loggerheads about Israel, for example. So, because Eleanor, of course, was at the UN when Israel was created, and she doesn't have a romantic view of the process so much as Hillary does. But it's called The Companion. Hillary Clinton woke up in Michigan in the GM plant strike of 1936. Eleanor Roosevelt stood at a steaming stew pot, filled containers to pass up to the men. She smiled. After 44 days, there'll be members of a union. Franklin wouldn't let troops in, and I financed the strike. My dear, you look naughty and lovely as ever. Not wronged wife or riled mother of a nation. Smoothed Hillary's gammon fringed back with a hand smelling damply of potatoes. Hillary said, I've missed you. God, I voted for the Iraq War. I'm threatening Iran. My health insurance plans went down the gutter and my campaign angels are capitalists from Delhi. Eleanor, I've outsourced my integrity. Put down that spoon. You were never a nurturer either. You didn't invent image, retorted Eleanor, but still pleased that a visitor was so pretty. Would, however, anyone elect her? McCain would win if they just wanted someone deadly with a sheen of compromise. She laughed. Being a woman is as good for the imagination as being crippled like Franklin, don't forget. Don't throw in your cards just yet. It was after Christmas and the factory frozen. The two gripped hands together for protection, knowing that the only friend can die within.